Welcome back. This is the second video about being open and responsible at home. So the second area of concerns, the second area that concerns really group around, are to do with infrastructures that support openness. Many institutes we recognize struggle with legacies of low resourcing. They struggle with lack of financial resources to be able to implement new systems. The strategic resource distribution requirements of low and middle income country institutions often mean that open science activities are underfunded. This means that there's lack of finances to fund open science practices, there's lack of information and communication technology infrastructures, there's lack of technical support, and there's lack of guidance. And this can be very disappointing and debilitating, particularly if you're starting out and you're enthusiastic about open science. And this can lead to a situation in which researchers feel a bit powerless because you know that there are a lot of resources online, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're accessible. So your bandwidth might be so low that you can't download stuff. You might not have access to up-to-date computing, hardware and software. You might struggle with lack of technical support, which means that you can't do what you need to do. However, as I've would like to suggest, there are a lot of resources that you can start using in the meantime. Waiting for the perfect infrastructure in your institution can mean that you would probably be waiting for a really long time. However, there's lots of stuff that you can start thinking about while you start on. And the first is, as I said before, there's a huge amount of open science tools that are starting to be freely available online. In the top left, the diagram is just illustrating some of these and illustrating how over the years, from 2010 to 2015, there's been a huge array of different tools that you can use to start enhancing collaborations, managing your research, managing your documents, and so forth, that are freely available online that you can start using and integrating into your research practices. In the top right, you will see a screenshot from Wiley. There are a lot of concerns about institutions not having funds to support open access publishing, but many journals, like the Wiley journals, will have waivers and discounts for authors publishing from developing countries. This can mean that you can get up to 100% discount for your APCs, your article processing charges. It is important to note that these APC waivers and discounts are not always visible on the homepage of the journal. And sometimes you do have to search around a little bit on the website to be able to find out if there is a waiver. Sometimes it is useful just to contact the managing editor to ask about these waivers. Editors are usually very keen to get researchers from low and middle income countries publishing in their journals, and therefore are very happy to help you navigate the APC waivers or APC discounts and so forth. In the bottom right, I have included a link for Zenodo, and this is just to highlight the amazing amount of repositories that are starting to emerge online that are freely available for use. So Zenodo is just one of those. We've got Figshare, we've got a number of other ones that are really useful for researchers as you want to start sharing your data, sharing your papers, sharing any other research outputs. This can be particularly helpful in cases where your institution doesn't have its own repository, because it still ensures that your data, your research are out there, are searchable, get a DOI, a digital object identifier, and can be cited, and you can get credit for these resources. This slide links to the open science tools that I demonstrated in the last slide. There are huge amounts of ways that you can start thinking about becoming more open, integrating these tools that will help you with your research into your workflows. So just looking at the link at the bottom, 101 innovations at .wordpress.com, can give you an idea of some of these tools that you can tap into and some of the ways you can start revolutionizing your own research, even while you wait for your institution to, in a way, catch up. There are also a huge amount of resources in terms of database and data sources. Knowing where to look is incredibly important. This is another slide from Andy Nobes from INAS, where he was just listing some of the research data in databases around the world that are particularly applicable perhaps to African researchers. We've got stuff like the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, Africa-specific databases, and then offline databases, and so forth. So getting familiar with some of these and getting to understand how they can provide useful data sources for you, even if you don't have research money to generate your own data, can be incredibly important. Another area of concern relates to lack of expertise and training. Many people say, oh, I feel that I want to go forward in my ability as a data scientist and my understanding of open science, but I just don't know where to look, and my institution is not able to provide me with the resources. I would like to point out the range of different, usually free or very low cost trainings that are available. Of course, you are on one of those at the moment, the Code Data RDA Research Data Science Schools. You have things like the Open Science MOOC, which is amazing for learning more about open science. You've got the Carpentries Network, where you can start advancing your data science skills. The RStudio community, which you can tap into for training sessions, for online recorded webinars and so forth. And then also the forums that we were talking about, that you can really start getting an understanding of what's going on in the community, if there are training opportunities, if there are webinars. So there's a lot you can tap into even while you're waiting for your institution to start adding training. And also these are resources that you could potentially start introducing into your institution to try and get other people in your own institution interested in data science and in open science. There are, of course, a lot of support networks that can help you as a researcher. Author Aid, which is a network run out of INASP, is incredibly helpful as a support network for early career researchers who want to start publishing. They will pair you with a mentor, an established researcher mentor, who will help you develop your manuscripts, advise you on where to publish, how to publish, and so forth. The Global Young Academy is a great place to start meeting influential and up-and-coming researchers, not only in your own institution, in your own country, but across the globe. There are lots of networks like Medicine Africa, Scholars at Risk, that can really start linking you into regional and international networks and provide support, provide training, provide subject-specific advice, and provide networking opportunities. Of course, we recognize that a lot more is needed. We do need local investment in open science infrastructures, and this will probably take some time. However, global infrastructures and practices are changing, and we're hoping that you'll be able to tap into some of these while we wait for open science infrastructures at home to evolve. What we do need are more voices from lower middle income countries in these international discussions and networks to make sure that they work for researchers in lower resource contexts. If we don't tell people the challenges that we're facing, people will never be able to help us start addressing them. So we need to make sure that we're visible in these international networks, that we're not shy to point out things that aren't working for us, and then we're not shy to ask for help, to make sure that these communities of really enthusiastic people can start making sure that what we need is being addressed. But we also need to start thinking about what else we can do to help researchers overcome these resource limitations. The third area is, of course, personal concerns. And all researchers around the globe have concerns about implementing some open science practices. The graph, the table on the right, is a summary of a survey that was done by Wiley in 2016, where they asked researchers in, I think it was 8 different countries, why they were hesitant to share their data. These were high-income countries like the US and the UK and so forth. And as you can see, many of the concerns that are listed are probably concerns that you listed on the Google Doc as well. And what I'd like to point out from this table is, of course, that these concerns are prevalent in research communities around the globe, but also that they are legitimate and often relate to cultural and regulatory challenges. And these concerns are particularly concerns about being scooped, concerns about scrutiny of data and methods and being called out for something being a little bit dodgy, concerns about data being misused once it's released, and concerns about unintended harms from the reuse of data or research. In contrast to these concerns, and it's important that we recognize these concerns are legitimate, it's also important to point out that there are lots of different ways in which you can start safeguarding your data, safeguarding your software, your code, your publications, and so forth, to try and offset some of these concerns. And one of the most important are understanding Creative Commons licenses and software licenses. These licenses are specifically designed for open science resources. but set some sort of expectation of reuse on users who would reuse that. So Creative Commons license, you can select how the resource can be reused. You can say that it's totally open, that you need to, any reuse of it needs to be shared alike, that it cannot be used for commercial purposes and so forth. So by understanding Creative Commons and the GPL software licenses and so forth, you can set some sort of expectation for reuse, that if the resource are not reused according to your expectations, you can start raising concerns about the researchers who reuse them and start trying to highlight these questionable research practices to the research community. In this, of course, organizations like COPE are very important in raising these concerns and being an avenue for whistleblowing. Knowing your rights and responsibilities can also be helped by understanding the codes of ethics and professional conduct within your discipline. So the Computing Society Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, the ACM Code of Conduct, would perhaps be very useful for you because it not only outlines what the community expects from you, it also outlines how you can expect other people in that community to act. And it's a very good starting point to have discussions if you feel that people are acting ethically and responsibly, to start using that as a basis document to highlight these concerns. It's also useful to recognize that openness is a continuum. We're not expecting everyone to be open all the time, and you need to take baby steps. So offsetting some of these concerns can be done through taking baby steps and starting small. Start with trying to publish in an open access journal, then try to start releasing a preprint, then start releasing your data in Zenodo and so forth. So build up an iterative movement towards being more open. I always like to think of openness as starting in a very pragmatic place. And this quote from Russ Poldrack, I think, is incredibly useful. So by starting to think about openness, think about yourself as a collaborator. And he says your primary collaborator is yourself 6 months from now, and your past self doesn't answer emails. So it's really useful to start thinking of openness just as a way of structuring your own research, trying to make sure that you're managing your data properly, documenting your data properly, getting your metadata in order, and start thinking of it as a personal benefit, and then start pushing your way out into being a little bit more open. The third obvious area of concerns when it comes to individual researchers talking about concerns are the risk of releasing data that can be reused for negative purposes. It's important to recognize that unintended harms are an unavoidable element of research. While we have very good intentions in our research, sometimes research can be misused, and that can be unavoidable. However, ensuring that your data are visible and transparent and using trusted infrastructures can be a way to offset some of these concerns. As they set requirements on users and contributors, it ensures that there's lots of eyes on the data, lots of eyes on the reuse of data, and lots of people who can flag up any concerns. If you have any concerns about managing the risk of releasing data, it's always useful as a first step to discuss your concerns with peers. Often they will have very good advice. Often they will have very good context to be able to discuss these concerns further. So please don't use the concerns as an automatic reason not to share data, not to share resources, but use it as a very important way of starting to think about where best to start sharing these. I've included the logo for Re3Data, which is a registry of research data repositories. These are trusted research repositories that have good practice, have good metadata standards, and have a good community buy-in. So searching for databases to share on Re3Data will make sure that you're using a trusted infrastructure, and that this will be a way of enhancing the responsibility towards trying to avoid unintended harms. Of course, we need more evidence, particularly around personal concerns. There's a lack of evidence of low and middle income country concerns. There are very few studies of what concerns scientists in low and middle income countries have regarding open science. And because of this, there's a tendency to treat low and middle income country concerns as just the same as high income countries, but perhaps a bit more so because we have less resources and less infrastructure. But that's not always the case. We have very different research cultures, research communities, research challenges. And what we need are more evidence about what is working, what is preferred, and what is still needed. So by creating and joining and interlinking networks of support in both in low and middle income countries, but making sure that we are in part of the international networks is really key to fostering open science. And we need to always be thinking about what else we can do to help researchers overcome concerns about being open. It's always important to recognize that openness is a lifelong journey. And as I said before, there are many different ways you can start your journey. You can start publishing preprints. You can make sure your data are fair. You can start releasing bits of code onto GitHub. You can think about publishing your lab notebooks, using version control on GitHub, register your project on the Open Science Framework, start doing science communication, start talking more. There are many ways you can start shining a bit more light onto your research, making your research resources available, and just making yourself a bit more visible in the open science community. So in the discussion, the live discussion on Wednesday and Friday, we're going to be talking about the concerns you listed on the Google Doc. But having watched these two videos, I would like you to go back to the Google Doc and start adding some of the resources I talked about to the Google Doc, to start thinking through perhaps whether some of these resources might offset some of your concerns. And we'll talk about them more in the live session. So I'm going to stop the video now, and then we are going to start talking a little bit more about learning to look at the bigger picture.